Manufacturing Hub. Very interesting conversation as we continue on our theme of factory hardware reinvented. If you guys had somehow managed to miss the last couple of weeks, David Nichols kicked off on episode 127. And then we had Bill and Chuck on last week talking about all-in-ones from Horner Automation. Shout out to you guys, our sponsors for this month. You guys should absolutely go ahead and check back. Both of those conversations were amazing. No pressure, Davide. We'll go introduce you in a second. I feel like I should have said no pressure before that, but we have had a couple of great conversations. Excited for the second half of this theme as we continue as we continue on. If you guys are longtime listeners, longtime watchers, welcome back. If you're new here, welcome. I will let everyone know next Thursday, August 31st, Vlad and I've got a special live build going on. We'll be sure to go ahead and link that into all of our live chats so you guys can go ahead, make sure you register for the event that we're putting on with Siemens. I'm very excited about it. Vlad is about the same as we get to right before any of these projects, wondering, Dave, how did you rope me into this this sort of thing once again? Which means we are right on track for where we need to be to put on a great show next week, where we go pull some hardware together, go pull in some interesting software platforms, and hopefully give everyone a bit more of an idea of what can be done in 90 minutes, which again excites me a lot. Again, I want to shout out and thank Horner Automation Solutions Group for sponsoring this, and I'd like to officially welcome everyone. Welcome to Manufacturing Hub. I am Dave. This guy down here is Vlad, and I would like to welcome our very special guest, Davide Pascucci of Bright IIoT, onto Manufacturing Hub. Davide, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me, guys, and it's a pleasure and an honor to be a guest of your show, and thank you again.
Awesome. Thank you so much for, again, joining us today. I think it's going to be a really good conversation. That being said, before we dive into maybe more of a technical discussion, Davide, could you give us a bit of a background? How did you get into industrial automation? What was your career like? And ultimately, how did you get to starting your company? And what are you guys doing today?
Sure thing. Yeah, I mean, so as maybe you guys know me, and I'm from Italy, right? So my career, started basically in the oil and gas. I first bachelor on anything. I have like what could compare like an associate degree here in the U.S. And so I start, working with this like EPC contractor, and mainly, where like works in the Middle East or North Africa. And my job was basically in the, like engineering team dedicated in the automation and instrumentation. So we were developing, like data sheets, documentation, PNIDs, and also like we were like interfacing with the OEM suppliers, and interfacing of course with the other departments. So that's where I started. I worked there in that like market with different companies since I left Italy basically. So I worked for about like 10 years, and then I came to the US in 2013. And of course, I had like some bump roads, to get like my, like green cards and all of that. And then I did like a variety of works before, I was aiming for Houston, Texas, because I said, from my experience, Houston is huge on oil and gas. So that's what my background there. And then I found this company. So, and then when they asked me while they were interviewing me, they said, hey, we have like this, what would you were doing back in your country, or we have like this division that does, like PLC integration and all of that. I said, it's kind of interesting. Can we start, like 50-50 maybe? And then instead, I ends up like going, 100% to the PLC group. And that's where, I started, on hands-on, programming and all of that, going in the field. And that was back in 2014. And then I did like, of course, oil and gas, traveling, mostly here, in West Texas. And then in 2018, I received another opportunity to come up here in the DFW. I took it and I moved up here. And then from there, I work with this company and I'm still in good relationship with them. But my interest, switched to the manufacturing, as I've seen, a lot of, surging, you can tell, robotics, visions, ocean side of, the manufacturing. Everything was like super interesting to me. While, the other stuff that I've done for years, I said, this is kind of boring. So then, I start, studying and turning, and I ask myself, how much of an effort I need to make, to make this switch, and then by the time I was thinking about that, I took another, opportunity and was more toward, manufacturing. But my struggle was with these companies that I had, my ideas, and I was sharing my ideas, and they were basically, almost never applied, right? So I said, you know what? I said, if I have this idea, good or bad, or that they are, let me give a try. Let me try by myself, and that's what I thought. And then so as I was putting together, reading, about business, and I got this opportunity, as a consultant, basically. So this company had a need of one guy that was Italian, basically, and he was good with Allen Bradley, because they had during COVID, they had this plant in Italy that they were trying to commission. And so they were a lot. There was a lot of miscommunication. From here, they were sending basically the command, they do this, do that, and the guy on the other side, they couldn't really get it. So I did a couple of hours per week, pretty much, like a translator, technical translator, let's say. But we were able to accomplish the task and commission this plan. Then later on, and the same guy from here, he called me, hey, I got this opportunity, do you want to come to our plant here, in the US and take a look? Yeah, sure thing. And then I said, this is my, opportunity. And then, at the end, he showed me the plant. I asked him if he would allow me to do with, my own business. He said, yeah, no problem. And then from there, we won this project, and it was the first, working, of course, on the side, a lot of hours, until we got to the point where I got, basically, I was by myself still. And that, time of commissioning, and then I went, full time, and, that was back in 2022. And then now here we are. So that's long story short.
Awesome. And I guess I've got a couple of questions for you, but I'm curious, because I think many people at least reach out to me with the question of what would it look like to move to the US, or North America in general, and find a job in, instrumentation or ultimately PLC programming. And I'm curious, I guess, to dig into your experience on that side. And I like the fact that you leveraged, the oil and gas experience ultimately, but I'm assuming that the platforms may have been different. So I'm curious, what were your conversations like? What kind of maybe interactions you would expect for someone looking to do that same shift, and maybe some lessons learned from that experience?
Well, yeah. So the jump, we took, me and my wife, we took a leap of faith, of course. I was able to be here and, get the green card, because my wife she's, US citizen. That's, of course, facilitate a lot, as you know. And so that problem, it wasn't solved like this, but you require a pile of documents like that. But of course, it's the easiest way to get to this country, right? And then as far as finding, good jobs, the language barrier for me, was something that, had to learn quickly. But what helped me a lot, since when I came in, like 2013, I came in first in Puerto Rico, and there I learned Spanish. And of course, you go, you name it, everywhere, but mostly, Florida and Texas. There are a lot, Mexican, Latino people in
Yep.
general, and they work in the construction, as you know, right, in the maintenance. So that helped me a lot. So while I was learning, like, and get that Texan accent because it's really strong. If you come in, and like me, I had like experience while I was working the Middle East, and I had like with Texan guy and barely understand them back then, and while I was learning, picking up, so these guys helped me out a lot because I was pretty fluent in Spanish, because I lived like a year and a half, like in Puerto Rico before I moved to the mainland, and that's where I did like all my paperwork for the green card,
Mhm.
etc. And then I did, like I said, some, I took like a variety. I work Home Depot. I work in the like sales, tons of things before I got to that job in Houston. So I said
Mhm.
wherever I pick up everything, because they don't know me, they don't know the background. I need, like, to prove myself. I need to push harder than everybody out there,
Mhm.
to be able to get to the edge, right, on whatever I'm doing. um and at some point I also like applied for the Navy. I got that
Okay.
close, and then this opportunity in Houston. But every path I was looking,
Interesting.
when you start like figuring out like a new country, how it works, and it took me like a while, even like the economy, the how it's structure, and everything. So yeah.
No, that's a great story, and I appreciate you sharing. Some of the
No
other
problem.
thoughts that come up. Yeah, at the end of the day, you must provide for your family, so there's no, I want to say, like, bad options. What about on the tech side, right? So I'm assuming that again the platforms are probably different. I don't know if standards are different, but did you have to somehow like relearn on the tech side, or at least like bridge some of the gaps? How was that
The,
learning curve for you?
the way, yes, between the two countries is totally different. Here it's like free capitalism, right? Over there it's more like towards socialism. The government control pretty much everything, higher taxes, everything that it's like above like the normal things, and then you hear like stories every day from there that like are affecting like the taxes bad, especially for a business owner to make it happen over there. So yeah, and of course I dig like deeper in the taxes, like when I opened my business. I bought like this book, for example. This is something that I wanna you I wanted to suggest this one. If you have a
Hmm.
business, this is really good. So I read that, and there are a lot of tips and insights that maybe not everybody knows. But yeah, there are big differences,
And
really
so I
big.
guess like that brings us to like starting your own company. What was that process like? So I think you've alluded to, you had a contract that started a bit like on the side and then allowed you to, like dive into your company with some income. But I'm assuming you had thoughts about, it's not an easy step for anyone to take. Like how did you like prepare or think about it? And again, like any lessons learned maybe.
Yeah, I mean, the idea was always in my mind for pops up, and I said I don't know where it's gonna bring me, right? So, but and I didn't think about like taking that opportunity and turn to what I turn. It's just like for me, I'm a man of faith. I pray always. God help me and let me like take advantage at maximum of this opportunity. And that's what I did. I always like say, hey, I have to do like the best job I could, in every situation, and then see what happened, right? And then, like I said, before this came up, like between 4 or 5 months of like ingesting tons of like videos, between videos and books, how to set up, how the best way, and then like I said, this happened like one after the other one. And then I said, let's do it, but of course on this, like 6 months, let's say 6-7 months before I went full blown, let's say, he gave me time like to understand better, and he gave me like that, security, I would say, for uh like say, hey, yeah, I still have an income while I'm doing this, I'm receiving some extra money, and then let's put aside, because of course I know that sooner or later it was gonna happen, like that I had to do like the big like step, let's say.
Mhm.
But for me, to be honest, people say, hey, it's hard. For me, I don't know, it just came natural. I don't know if I was like prepared. I don't know. I know only that I ingested a tons of information, and before I did this step, and I don't know, it just came. And then in the meantime, while I was working for this project, I was able like to tile a little bit other customers. So it gave me like that security, that, hey, I'm not putting like all my money in just that bucket, right? Or my efforts, right? If this goes down, at least I have a couple of them that they keep me up, while I'm pushing and building and doing what I have to do for the company.
Good. Dave, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I one to kind of mirror Bobby Cole's comment. Your story is very much the American dream, right? The coming over and having not nearly as much language knowledge and absolutely
Yeah,
no idea how to understand a Texan accent, up to
exactly.
running your own business. So first, I think Bobby and everyone would like to commend you for that. I do have a question, right? So you talked about kind of some of the early opportunities were working with an Italian company who was coming to go and install and do work in Puerto Rico. Do you see a lot of Italian companies going and moving their product, be it equipment builds or other things, over to the US? Do you see many of those and lots of opportunity to bring those products and services to the US?
So there certainly are, and for example, now I'm gonna attend like Pack Expo, and I went through,
Hmm.
and they have actually like a section for the Italian manufacturer.
Ooh, okay.
So, and it's pretty big, I would say. We are, like historically, strong on building like different types of, for food, and the text. How do you say the textile, right? But I don't know all of them. Like the background is strong, so, and a lot of the, even in the wood industry, like the boards. There is a company that is pretty huge. It's close to where I was born. It's called BS,
Hmm.
and
Okay.
they have an headquarter here in the US in Chile. So that's a huge one. They built like this machine, like to cut like this, like board or of like compressed wood, the one that you use for the kitchens, things like that. Um, and so mentioning that, so on my last trip in Italy, I had a chance to meet like this company that is like an automation OEM, so focusing in the motions. And so the company is called CMZ, and we got in touch by case again. So I went to a customer and to do something, right? So, and after I finished, he said, "Look, I have like you're from Italy. I have this Italian machine, I said, he opens the door. I never seen like this company. I don't know them. I said, let me investigate. And then I look at their website, and then I got in touch with them. And then I had the chance, like I said, to go and visit their facility. Beautiful, like to see like that side on how you built like the hardware and tied together with the software. So they built like PLC and the servos and motors, of course, and mainly, and they are based in codices. Everything is in codices.
Okay.
So there are companies that they are willing yet to move and show their products over here, um, and there are already like companies that actually are doing a lot of work here.
Interesting. Absolutely. I think that it's always interesting to have the conversations of different people and their perspectives from different countries, bringing and trying to move those products into the US or into Europe, or kind of vice versa. I think that those are always very interesting stories. Vlad shared a company he's done some work with in Italy.
Yeah.
I know he's talked about. I know he's talked about that. I've done some work with a couple of Italian companies in the past, bringing the machines into U.S. manufacturers. So there is certainly a lot of industrial base and a lot of industrial opportunity in Italy. I'd like to go transition that away a little bit into talking about some of the factory hardware stuff, and I want to talk about IIoT. And you named your company Bright IIoT, and to me, that immediately says you think IIoT is the future, at least some part of the future. Can you tell us, from your perspective, how you think that IIoT is going to change how we've historically done implementations, and will do them into the future?
Yeah, sure. I named my company, like I thought, first I said, everybody is like, automation or control XYZ, I wanted to give like something different, right? So, and to my perspective, like IIoT is like, my goal ultimately for the company, is implementing like deploying like this application, like between, traditional controls and robotics, and then data collection, and have like this system, like synced all together, where we can sharing like data across the board and elaborate on top of this data. Then plus we can send this data to an higher level. That's kind of like the big pictures that I've like imagined for my company. But IoT, like it's like a spread, like like scenario where you can start, of course, with the sensors, and then go up, like I said, to a higher level, and communicate up to the corporate, like structure, right? So yeah, that's generally speaking what is my idea about like IoT.
I definitely agree that there's a lot of opportunity, I think, in tying all of those systems together. I think that currently, at least again, in my experience, they're a bit disjointed, right? And there's obviously some communication happening, but we're not collecting
Yes.
nearly as much data as we could. Especially, I would say, even like on the robotics side. I like that you brought robotics into that as well, but I think we can siphon out the data from PLCs, but we don't always understand like robotics applications, at least from the customers that I've worked with. And same
Yeah,
on the
because
vision systems too, right?
yes, the robotics, for example, we have discussed it with different OEMs we work with, and so where you can start, like like is the lifetime of the axis, right? The servo motors right there, and you
Mhm.
can extract tons of data that these devices are giving to you. So that's a starting point. Um, for the robotics, and then on the vision system, I don't know where you can start, but even there should be like like maybe the lens, or like verifying that all like the electronics, the lens is in good shape, is still like giving you like quality images, um and yeah.
Well, I think like even on the vision side, right? Like even so I've seen where you would log, let's say, pass or fails from a camera because that's usually what's sent to the PLC, on a base level. But I've rarely seen a system that logs, let's say, like measurements. And again, I don't know
Hmm.
if you've worked with those applications, but I think there's interesting, I want to say, data that you can collect to optimize them to make them better. I've seen again where you store a bunch of those images on a hard drive and then you can go back and sort of manually reinspect and see if you can make adjustments. But I've not seen, where there's like a closed loop where it makes changes to itself almost. I think that's going
They,
to be
there
like the next
is,
push.
so for example, with one of these OEMs, they developed this. They have a simulation platform where you can actually run what you program, and then you can make like the adjustment. But again, it is a closed loop, and then you can reload like the information to the camera, and that's one option
Mhm.
that can be done. So I think they are going like, as more as we go toward this, for example, vision, it's, I think, the most developed, like, in other words, where AI is most like, like applied, right?
Mhm.
And for example, adjustment real time on some of this, like vision system, they're happening. Like, I don't know if I can I can mention the name, but I've seen, like, at the Automate show, this OEM that basically has got like this smart, like peaking, beam peaking, where
Okay.
it turns like the robot to where it sees like which one is the best like parts to pick and where to pick.
Mhm.
So it's correcting, like real time. Instead, other ones is like, you build this model, test it, and then you can see like on your screen without even, it's just a simulator, and then make the adjustment and push back like your correction.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess my general thought, when it comes to like software versus hardware, when we were even like discussing this theme, I think like in my mind, a lot of times hardware is just sort of following the software, right? So we need to run better applications. We want to be able to distribute them versus via like different protocols. So we need to integrate the right chipsets. But I think it's not true. The more I thought about it, it's not always the case, right? So one example that Dave and I talked about a lot was universal IO. I think the
Yeah.
other example we talked about, there's a lot of research done in robotics, right? Like with the flexible robotics or, like robotics that are, I want to say, like different than what's currently on the market. I'm wondering if you have any like interesting maybe thoughts or cases where hardware is sort of making some advancements or making maybe some projects for you possible over it being just, here's like a more powerful industrial computer per se.
Uh, I'm To be honest, I don't think she had ever, get through like this type of application where, like, yeah, there are certainly, I would say, more robust hardware, in the
Mhm.
fact that maybe, for industrial application, we use like fanless, like IPC.
Yep.
And that's, I think it's, it's like with closed eyes, I at least, go that way. Like even the enclosures, like, but mostly it's the robustness of the hardware itself, not like
Mhm.
on the PCB board, the chip side. That one, I mean, yeah. So of course, if you see like, you load like a tons of things, on the same, like device, and then definitely you need like more cores
Mhm.
Yep.
to handle like that, right? But yeah, it always depends on the application, right? If you run like one application, and then, yeah, then some like little software, yeah, I mean, a basic, computer is fine. But then let's say there are like talks where, again, these OEMs want to put like this IPC with the capabilities of, like universal IOs, and, like spin, like, for example, codices, right? And then on the same, like device, maybe, on a different like image, right? And spin like the vision, right? like software and tie the camera. So that's, I think, it could be like, an application for the future, instead of, like having like this separate, entities, right? And as we progress, with the power of this, units, I think, it can be like soon like released, that maybe it's feasible right now if you
And I
get like
think
a really powerful.
I definitely agree with you, David. I think like Caleb is also adding a good point, right? So I think on the protocol and networking side too, since we're, as you mentioned earlier, trying to pull all the data, we're trying to collect more information from the plant floor. So it's important to be able to handle that traffic, right? And again, I think like a lot goes into the networking layer, and I'm certainly not familiar with all the nuances. But as
Yeah.
you even start passing those like images from vision systems, you can pretty quickly run into some bottleneck and like traffic
Yeah,
issues.
because you're right. Because on a ideal scenario, you would spend like the networks, as well, right? But in the reality, you need to rely on the customers, a lot of, at
Mhm.
least for our experience, right? So you go there, hey, we got this network, this island, whatever. You have to work with that, and that's where this edge devices, hey, right? So and maybe like you sort it out, you elaborate, you send like just what is needed, not to clog the network, in other words, right? But yeah, I mean, if you, ideally speaking, if you can build like the infrastructure, which is rare, and especially when you work on existing stuff, and then yeah, so those devices come really like helpful, um,
If I may interrupt briefly, I think I'd like to make the counterpoint of hardware is holding back software, right? I think,
right.
especially when we look at consumer electronics, I think there are lots of instances in which we could write better software, we could write more powerful software if we had more computing capability, if we were able to go cool something off quickly, if we were able to move from a 100 watt to a 200 watt power brick, we could run more
Hmm.
power through everything. We could go cool it off. We could run more computing power through it. I think, especially lots of times in the industrial space, hardware pushes software to go optimize itself because we need hardware that's going to, I mean, in most cases, 5 years is not long enough of a lifetime. As Vlad and I have talked about over and over again, in lots of cases, people are expecting 10 or 20 or 30 years of lifetime out of many of these devices. And if we move into, we'll go upgrade the hardware whenever we possibly can to keep up with the software, then we're going to get on the, hey, we've got to go upgrade at the same speed that we go upgrade phones or laptops or headphones or any of those things. And as much as we as practitioners and technicians would love to be able to go in and rotate factory hardware every 5 years or thereabouts, I don't
Yeah.
think that that's a particularly realistic solution. What I do think, to go back to the IIoT comment, is that IIoT allows us to, for a relatively insignificant amount of money, go test and deploy something. So instead of having to go expand a hardware network and run power to places that we haven't had power, we can take some wireless controllers and we can take some wireless sensors. We can go for a couple or a few $1,000s, go deploy sensors in places that they haven't been deployed before. And if we don't have the smarts, we can go play around with a smart controller and we can go pull it all the way back to that location and go try out a different IIoT style of solution.
Yeah, on the wireless, it depends on the industry, I would say,
Mm-hmm.
because in the manufacturing, when you start deploying like sensor, you need speed, right? And then I have like an example with one of my customers that they deployed like wireless devices, and it's
Mm-hmm.
a complete claustrophobe. They're losing like like productivity data. Yeah, they are complaining a lot, and they show me like, I thought wireless. I know like different brands they made, again, industrial like devices. And then when they show me, instead it was like a clear enclosure with like a PC board in there, really, really like cheap. I said that's why maybe you're having problem. First, wireless. I not really suggest, like, if you need to count like high speed production. No, you go straight wired. If it's like
Yep.
like an analogs, like you're measuring flow rates, and I've done like tons of that in the oil and gas. It's, you don't need like the data like immediately. Yeah, it's, I'm making that every like pulling every 5 seconds. I'm fine, pretty much. Manufacturing, it's totally different animal, right? But yeah, you're right. And we have done like I said, it doesn't need to be complicated. You pick twice, you put them in the right spot, you write a little bit of codes, and then there you have like your like OE like just right away. And we've done using like the customer network, and we push like all this information up to the corporate on existing machines.
I would agree with the wireless point. I think like I've seen some like specific use cases where I think it makes sense. One of which was like rotating drums, so getting usually cables. Obviously, you can do it with very specific hardware, but it becomes complicated the more signals you have. So I think wireless communication to a drum is fine. Then you just bring in power, but otherwise, in at least like a production setting, it's difficult to justify. And again, I've not monitored sort of the wireless traffic, but I could see how it starts to become a problem if you add way or like too much of it. So
yeah, I have, like I said, this particular example of this customer that they are having tons of issues, right? But I think when people goes to wireless, it's like, hey, I have this existing equipment, right? So I want to like to tie these new devices to monitor, but I don't want to like spend the money on the electrical parts. And that's where maybe IO-Link and M connectors come to play. Like you don't want to like pull wires. There you go, a couple of clips. We can tie like the devices with brackets, and then run like this pre-made cable back to the controller or to the IO-Link master, right? And that's where we have done that too. And that's where the easiest, like, again, you buy everything, you come in and put together in like let's say a couple of minutes, and you have like this device coming in. Instead of, hey, I need to pull the wire from here, where I have to put conduits, and you name it.
I've used similar applications before, especially for tank farms, like in food and beverage. If we're holding or storing things, to be able to confirm that we do have the quantity or volume of what we think we've got it in. And then I've got a couple of applications that I've used at a refinery for basically similar things. So instead of having to go look at 500 site gauges every day, or hopefully every shift, and someone go walk that and mark it down on a piece of paper and then find the piece of paper, you can go leverage wireless sensors, and then on a single application, we have now, we've almost replaced one full-time employee equivalent of going and walking 500 tanks once or 3 times a day.
No, the tanks is perfect for those wireless application.
Absolutely.
I've done a lot, like, again, in the oil and gas, like you mentioned, refineries, tank farms. It's basically, if not all of them, a lot are, wireless. Like,
yes.
Because again, it's an analog, it's not like, hey, I need to check like this, like productivity or, the encoder, like things that are fast, and that's where, like, hey, you better go like with wired,
Absolutely. I think that this is a good time to take a brief pause before Vlad gets to ask the next question. We want to thank our sponsors at Horner Automation for sponsoring the Factory Hardware Redefined episode, and we're going to go learn a little bit more about them.
Horner Automation is a division of Horner Electric. Horner Electric can trace its roots back to 1949, when George and Mary Horner started their small family-run business, which is now a large, thriving family-run business. Horner Automation has been in operation for over 35 years and is headquartered in Indianapolis, Indiana. Horner designs, builds, and markets a wide array of industrial all-in-one controllers, consisting of programmable control, HMI, I/O, and networking, along with software and peripherals. Many of our automation products are manufactured and assembled in the USA. At Horner, we support our partners, distributors, and customers by providing quarterly factory training on our products and software, as well as an extensive YouTube presence of videos that include software and hardware tips, training, industry solutions, trade show clips, new product releases, and much more. Horner strives to provide value-added solutions for our customers. We have availability, an option for every budget, and incredible support and resources to help your project run smoothly. Everywhere you look, Horner Automation controllers are there.
Awesome. And again, thank you for Horner for sponsoring this theme. And thank you for Chuck for doing that nice voiceover. If you guys have missed the last, 100 or so episodes of me doing the ad read, feel free to go drop in the comments if you like the Chuck or someone else going and doing that. And we may go ahead and give my voice an extra 90 seconds of break during every episode. But no, thank you guys for sponsoring this theme. I will say, if you guys did not catch last week with Bill and Chuck, episode 129 on Manufacturing Hub, should absolutely go ahead and check that out. We talked a bunch about all-in-ones and applications and a bunch of absolutely wild applications. But back to Vlad, what were you going to go ask?
I was going to, I guess, make the comment and finalize that with a question, which is, I think we're at somewhat of a crossroads when it comes to protocols. And what I mean by that is, we've talked a little bit about, now we have MQTT, we have OPC UA. I think they're now sort of like almost expected to be on hardware. And the same goes for, your field devices. If you want to connect to them, there's now more and more protocols, I feel, right? And we mentioned like you can have a hub to connect to them. And I almost wish that we would standardize. And I know it's very difficult to do. In my mind, I think Ethernet solved a lot of problems we had with some older type of protocols, primarily on the Allen Bradley side, right? Like control net, device net. I think all of that has been made to some extent obsolete. But again, like now we have protocols that can pull data from the sensors. You can swap out sensors. I think it still would have been possible with like an RJ45 to, like an M12 connector, and then you assign an IP address to every sensor. For some reason, we didn't go that route. But in any case, like I'm curious, how do you see, again, like all these protocols merged into like is every device going to be now incorporating pretty much like everything? Do you think like we'll converge maybe to like hardware that's standardized on something? Again, my thought was switches and networks have already been figured out. Ethernet is great. It could be a variation of, Ethernet packets like other vendors have defined, but ultimately I like those networks. But for whatever reason, we're introducing more and more stuff on it now. What are your thoughts?
Oh, yeah. I'm 100% with you. I think we didn't change a bit, to be honest. Going back, starting with the blue holes and, device net, control net. Now we have still, Ethernet, Profinet, EtherCAT, CAN open, you name it, right? So we are still there, right? So we thought like, hey, yes, you're right. So we got there's all the switches, and taking advantage of the IT world and toward our world and say, okay, now it's time, to unify. No, it's, of course, like right here, we use a lot of Allen Bradley stuff, right? So Ethernet IP is the most famous, but, and then they did also a great work, like partnering with all of this, you scale, name it, right? So that you bring in EDS5, right? And it's kind of similar with the, Siemens, right? And especially with the product from, Europe, right? So they did pretty much a very similar job, right? But yeah, and then this other protocol, for what I heard, even on the hardware, and developing side, on the OEM, it's first it's cheaper, like EtherCAT and can open. They're cheaper to integrate and like on their devices, and then to develop like the software behind it. Yeah, and then EtherCAT, the advantage is that is extremely fast. So I think there are like application where like if you need, like, for example, in motion controls where you need like a deterministic like approach, I think EtherCAT, it's really a really good option. Not that the other doesn't work, but I think if you need like really narrow the precision, EtherCAT, it would be, I think, the best out there. And then all of these like companies that use EtherCAT, they also usually have like the conversion back to Ethernet IP, right? So you have this kind of isolation between like the motion network, which is great. You don't want anything to interfere, right, with those type of devices if you can. And then on the other side, you can exchange like information with the outside world, right? I think like this OEM will still stick with their like protocols. Yeah, my hope is like if they could unify, it would make like our life easier, of course. But I think it will stay utopic, probably.
And I think it's one of those scenarios. I can't remember like the exact image, but it was a comment where we have so many protocols. Let's make one to kind of rule them all, and now there's like one extra protocol that is now like
Yeah.
thrown in the mix, right? And for me, it's like IO Link. And IO Link, I think, like is great, right? Like I think what we can do with IO Link makes a lot of sense. But I also think that again, we could have done the same thing using like an Ethernet hub and being able to like directly communicate over 4-wire to like a field sensor. And again, maybe there's some nuances. I've not tested the limits of what it would take on the speed side, but it's I don't know. I still see like more protocols now than maybe a couple of years ago, even
Yeah.
though we're trying to consolidate.
No, yeah, I agree 100% with you. IO Link, is great, but most of the time, like the information you can extract, I mean, most of the time you don't use them. To me, like for the information he has, like seems like is kind of comparable to the heart. Like if you compare like all like the information that you can get from heart instrument, IO-Link is kind of similar on that, like type of information and inputs you can get from a device that is an IO-Link device, right? But most of the time, like you say, you plug in a sensor, and yeah, I need maybe that is measuring the temperature over there. I need just the, it's like a binary sensor, on and off, and that's about it, right? Then I'm not gonna go and usually take a look, like how much voltage is drawing. That's mostly like when we play with the drives. You're gonna take a look and see, okay, how much current, RPMs, you name it, right? So it's mostly on on the sensor. Yeah, it could happen that you need to monitor the particular information, but usually it's like you use I plug in this sensor because I need the temperature to measure the temperature on that motor, right?
Yeah, and I mean, like my thought was, again, we would see, like I said, we already have this for, let's say, VFDs, right? Like they send us data and allow us to change parameters. I thought like the same as the cost of obviously the chipsets decreases, which again is a whole like question mark with the supply chain, but ultimately you could add those same chips in sensors, be able to plug in over Ethernet. And again, power over Ethernet also is a question in my mind. I don't think it's maybe the right approach, but it could be used to have like a single cable going to that sensor and be able to draw the power. And again, obviously I understand it depends on the sensor, it depends on the field device, so there's nuances there. But
yeah, no,
Dave, what are your thoughts on all of this? Sorry, we're like going on this like rabbit hole, I feel.
No, no, no. I like it. I'm really enjoying all of Caleb's comments in here. And honestly, Caleb, I think of anyone we've ever had on is probably by far the person who has worked on IO Link the most. Again, I've said it before on this show. I'll say it again. I consider IO Link kind of like the most base level of communications of protocols. We're not going to go replace a bunch of other protocols. I think Caleb has mentioned in my posts before that he thinks we should get rid of like all IO and just go smart sensors into a variety of buses, like IO Link buses, which is interesting. I think it would take a while to get there. I think that it is possible. I think it is possible to do. But as I look at it, I think that we look at the concept of, in theory, a smart sensor like an IO Link sensor that we can plug into a standard bus, and we can go if we want to get the level, if we want to get kind of any of the very basic things, we can go get that from the sensor. Or if we want to go pull back more information from the sensor, we can also go and get more information from the sensor, and that's all user configurable. And I think that is the real value when it comes to something like IO Link, is to give us that information, and then we don't have to worry about, I don't know, 20 different varieties of a very similar dumb non-IO Link sensor that we've got to make sure that we program by pressing the correct number of buttons at the same time. And then we go plug it in, and we go plug it into the IO. And if we do not get the signals that we're seeing, we kind of scratch our head and we wonder if something got pinched, or we wonder if we've got to go check the connections, right? I think that it removes and reduces a lot of the ambiguity. And as to Vlad's point, that the chipsets come down, I think that there are huge opportunities to go just create a bunch of smart sensors. Or if you're like James, James is going to go make his own protocol that he thinks is going to be the best ever. And we're very excited to see what that protocol looks like. James, you and Vlad are going to have to arm wrestle the next time we're all together as to seeing who can become who gets to become the person with the one protocol to rule them all. Then we'll get a little ring and engrave some names on it on the inside. Lord of the Rings, which only feels appropriate. But no, I love these conversations. I love the conversations with Power over Ethernet, and then Caleb was bringing up IO Link over single pair Ethernet, which I don't think I've seen, at least certainly not in the field. But I think that is certainly interesting, especially because I think single pair Ethernet can now do something like 1,000 feet of run, of continuous run, which could very much open up a lot of these wireless items. But Davide, I would like to come back to you. We've talked about a bunch of different things. I wanted to know from your side, do you have any interesting stories either of work that you guys have done, or do you have any interesting stories and opportunities that you've come back from Automate or some of these other shows of what you think the future of the factory hardware is going to look like?
Yeah, so to connect to your point, like this, IO Link kind of, what I've seen at Automate is like this OEMs are going to the remotization of the devices, using this again M connectors like IO Link style, and basically the goal is getting rid like of the enclosure, in some instances, and then they are building like this IP69K, like servo drives, and also like I think they have like even PLC, like that, and that's like what I've seen, like even the tendency, like different of this. They built like these devices, that are washed down. You can stab these devices, on the side of your equipment, like kind of again IO Link, master, right? And yeah, so that's the point. Like, yeah, what I've seen, like on the hardware side, experience for us, it's still it's still like where we see like tons of traditional automation, like and again, introduction of this IO-Link. Yes, there are for sure, and but yeah, I mean, still we are still like doing what we have done like years ago, of course, introducing like this new technologies, and then on the AI side, I said, on the vision system, that's where we are most advanced, and we are start seeing, like more of this, like application that, as we discussed, they adjust to themselves. So, and really curious, where we are gonna get with it, but uh, I think for our industry, it's all good for what we're gonna see in the future, But until then, like we are still playing with like the regular PLC and all the stuff that we are using nowadays, right?
Absolutely. No, I agree. I think that it will be very interesting. Vlad, we have an unusual moment where we've got time for you to ask at least one more question before we give Davide the rapid fire questions at the end. So what is currently on your mind? What are you thinking about?
Well, I guess I was responding to James, who made a comment in the comments section, which is interesting, right? So he's saying, what do you think about managing firmware updates on smart devices? That feels like a future nightmare from a security perspective. At some point, vendors need to end of life their support, and sensors have a very long expected useful life, right? And I don't know.
Yep.
I think like in the current landscape, there's like zero chance that there's a scenario where you have a device that's always connected to, let's call it like vendor services, and they can at any time
Okay.
just push an update. I just think that would disrupt operations way too much. And the only way that would work is if you could like schedule timeframes. But even then, I think it's very difficult to maintain that capacity, right? And I don't know, David, if you have some thoughts. Again, I'm thinking that he's asking in the same sense that, like I guess the first example that comes to mind is like Tesla's to receive updates over the air because they have that, let's say, like wireless network connectivity. But same goes for your
Right.
phone, right? Like you get a notification or there's the new firmware, and you can either accept it or schedule it, let's say, like during the night and whatnot. So I don't know. I really don't see how that's going to be possible in manufacturing. I think that's going to be super invasive.
Yeah, if it's like plant floor, yeah, forget about it. If it's like like an application that is monitoring, yes, I would say it can go down, and it always depend. But that probably could be like like a better example where hey, I need to update my firmware. We're gonna go down like
Yeah.
kind of IT, but on the on the plant floor, no, forget about it. If you're gonna mention, yeah, we need to stay down, like, and bring down our, yeah,
Mhm.
if when we have a downtime, yes, you can do it. And I actually, there was a company that it was like a PLC OEM that went bankruptcy, that I had to work like years ago, and they had like this firmware upgrade that brought down like the plant multiple
Mhm.
times because their software wasn't good enough. So and then they had like to push this upgrades, the firmwares, and of course the customer was pretty upset, but and then they
But it's
went,
actually, I was gonna
yeah,
say, like,
but
I think like not the more I think about it, the more I think that there is an opportunity there, right? Because I think we've all spent a lot of time flashing firmware and then like validating that everything is good, right? So maybe there is, or I guess like again, maybe there's better software tools that can sort of deploy that and then be able to validate it, like to make sure there's like some tests are run against the device, and then you can go back to the previous version if something fails, for example, right? And again, I think it would take someone good at the firmware level to build, but I guess there is a pain point, right? Like there's a I guess, like an automation pain point where we start flashing one by one, and that takes, however many days, and there's a lot of time
Yeah.
spent there.
Yeah. So I'm gonna jump in just for a second because James followed up. He had a slightly different take on it, which was kind of more my thought of the way that he was going. Caleb has some good comments in here about how we can go do that, and that it's a solved problem. But James's point is that he's thinking it's more of a smart device sensors will run some Linux kernel, and that it will potentially have future vulnerabilities that need patching. Not that they need to be connected to the vendor. At some point, the vendors won't support the smart sensors, won't support the smart sensors and devices any longer. And I think that is a good and interesting point, right? So if in my mind, in the future, IoT is either going to be software as a service, which everyone here has lived through the pains of groups don't want to go pay for everything as software as a service. So in theory, you could go buy the hardware like a number of vendors have. Maybe you pay for some sort of management on top of that. Maybe you don't pay for some sort of management on top of that. But at some point, Linux kernels will have to be updated. At some point, something will have to be updated, and it's the end of the usable life. So let's say we install something today, and 4 years from now, the software vendor end of lifes it for maybe because there's an issue, maybe because there's a vulnerability, or maybe because it's time to go buy the next one. And we all know that if it's not broken, we're not going to go buy the next smart sensor and smart solution. So what happens at that point? What will happen when we see a variety of groups run and continue to run past end of life sensors and solutions that have Linux and other kernel vulnerabilities and attack vectors and all of those things? And what happens at that point?
Yeah, that question, but I think sensors, they needs to be as simple as they are right now, in my opinion. You need to keep things, simple and simplified instead of over, like complicated, like the process. Where you need to have. Yes, I agree. Sensor, right? It would be, yeah. I mean, talking about, IO-Link, yeah, I can extract, I can diagnose, I can do like different things, but still remain like basically, a sensor, right? So I don't think we have to overcomplicate like the stuff or devices where it's not needed, right? So that's what my point. But I mean, the firmware upgrade, I can say yes. I mean, if it's something that we know is critical, it's disrupting, is dropping, is faulting like the device, yes. But I don't think we need to pass like, we don't need to be like IT guys, where, okay, I'm gonna push this, like you said, across the board, and I'm gonna upgrade this firmware, and it's gonna take like X amount of time, and then they're gonna throw it through the network. It's gonna clog the network again, I don't think it's something like, at least I don't see it. I might be wrong, but I don't see it like happening, like that.
I mean, the only way I see this working, right? Like to James's point, and I think the point still goes back to my comment earlier, which is you would probably sell these sensors on a subscription-based rate, right? And again, like I don't know what the math would be, but let's say you have a proc sensor, it's going to be like $2 a month to run. You need to commit to a minimum of like 12 months. And then whoever the vendor is would manage the firmware and make sure that that sensor operates and then sends, let's say, that data to a hub on which you then have, again, like it could be Linux, it could be whatever IDE that then does the control, if you want to say, like using that sensor, but they would need to be on the hook to maintain its functionality, right? Like to a certain, you would have like an SLA agreement of 99.99 availability. You'd be able to schedule when the upgrades or deployments are going to take place. And ultimately, because you are paying on a monthly basis, again, it keeps them on the hook to support that versus, if you pay today, then obviously there's not a whole lot keeping them in 5 years to just say like, oh, we've released sensor version 2, version 3, and sensor 1 is no longer supported, right? Like I think it needs to make sense on both ends in order for this to work. But I think it's going to take some time, and I think there's a lot of complexity there, and I think there's a lot of also kind of who owns the data at that point and who manages the data. There's a lot of questions there, in my opinion.
There is. I thank you to especially Caleb and James in the comments for continuing to help drive that conversation. This is certainly a conversation that is a thing in of itself, and I think best case scenario we're making guesses as to what the future looks like, but this is absolutely the reason why we have these conversations on Manufacturing Hub. Thank you guys for that. Davide, you know that we're going to put you on the spot. I know we've been talking a bunch about the future and what you think the future looks like for the last 10 or 15 minutes, in part thanks to James and Caleb. But from your side, what do you think that the future of factory hardware and automation looks like in the next, 3 to 5 years?
Like I mentioned earlier, I think we're gonna need like more computing power as we develop and integrate this machine learning and AI. Certainly, we need more power at the edge. Especially for fast reaction. Of course, we can deploy application in the cloud, but then it's not always feasible, right? So I think we are gonna see that. We are gonna maybe, like I mentioned, see like this remote as they are seeing like hardwares, but then robots like an assembly actually like that are interacting with like traditional robots, since we have from like the, let's say hiring perspective, I've heard and talked with customer, they are having like tons of issues on hiring, even of course qualified technicians or operators. So there is a need to fill the gaps, so different and custom application that we, as a system integrator, we need to solve, most of the time, and to replace this lack of labor, right? So I think that's where a lot of opportunity are popping up even right now, and of course, the technology, seeing this tendency will follow, right? So depending, where we are going with the demand, right?
Absolutely. No, I think that the future will certainly be interesting, and this is probably one of the hardest future-based questions that I could ask anyone. So thank you for that, Davide. Next question up, we'd like to ask you for a book recommendation. Do you have a book that you have found useful and others might as well?
Yeah, see, it's I read a lot of business books personal improvement, and on my journey to open build my company, I came through Tim Groover. I don't know if you guys know him, and he was personal trainer for Michael Jordan and Kobe Bryant. So he basically was behind their success. They're pushing toward the limits, and then he wrote a couple of books. The first was Relentless. That's why I put on my t-shirt and hats too. And then this one that I read is called Winning. So I suggest if you you wanted to understand how this high achievers in different industries sport, for example, and I always look on other industries how to improve myself and my business, right? So if you really want to push your limit, and explode yourself the maximum speed and use your maximum potential, I really suggest that's what it's all about. There are some parts of the books where the way you explain the high achiever that wherever like variable are thrown at them, they are able like to handle like the situation basically in every wherever they are or what they are facing. Those are like the high achievers, like this big NBA champions, for example.
Interesting.
So yeah, that's what I suggest.
No, that's
I've
awesome.
picked it
Thank
up, so I appreciate
you.
that.
Like just in the last 90 seconds, you purchased the book.
Yeah,
Nice.
Now,
it's
now,
an
now
Audible. I've got plenty of
now,
credit.
I was gonna say so for newer listeners who haven't listened for 100 shows, you may not realize that the book recommendation section came directly from this of Vlad saying something like, "I've got extra Audible credits. What will I possibly buy?" So about 100 episodes, we started asking guests for book recommendations. And this feels like episode 26 all over again, with some of our pre-chat in the beginning and some of the book recommendations immediately. And so, awesome recommendation. Thank you for that, Davide. Thank you for keeping the dream alive, Vlad. Next question for you, Davide. We'd like to ask for some career advice, and typically we ask for some kind of early to mid-stage career advice. And if you will forgive me for going off script a little bit, you talked very early as to some of the things that you did when you decided you wanted to come over to the United States and kind of the path you took. What would be your best suggestion or recommendation for someone else who's looking to come to the United States to do this sort of work?
Well, to do like, yeah, you mean like what we're like in this industry? Yes, I mean, first of all, you need to have passion. If without passion, you're not going anywhere. If it's just for you, it's okay. It's my 9 to 5. Yeah, I mean, you're gonna stay average. If you want to really like great results, right? So you need to work on yourself, right, to grow like on how, again, referring to this book, on how you can extract the best out of you, and the mindset needs to be even when you're approaching like an employer, it needs to be like propositive. You need to be available, because a lot I interview guys, and my yes or no like question was, hey, you're working in the manufacturing, right? And so it happens that we work on weekends, because that's where the plant stop, right, for cleaning, for like maintenance, right? And then as soon as you mentioned Saturday, they came up with a variety of excuses. I need to go to my cousins. If you like approach that and you're looking for a job, right? So, and I mean, or there is like an ideal job, and then you create it and you build a company. But if you want to work with someone, you just have to adapt yourself, right? So with the situation. And I know like that you can give like a full 100%, of course, to these companies, but at least like the willing to learn is way more important, like the technical aspect, the willing to stay there, and that mindset that I'm gonna stay there until I fix the issue, right? That's way more important, than the technical aspect. Yes, you go and do it and study. There are tons of resources, of course. Your website, Vlad, it's your videos are great, and that's no
Thank you.
and no problem. So I've watched your videos. A part of you go YouTube, like you find tons. Nowadays it's not like before, because when I started, there were a few, and just in the last years that this content this came up more and more, on the social media and on the web. But I could think again, it's like you have to have like that mindset where I'm gonna learn this, I'm gonna push towards my limits. If you want, again, to be like a great programmer, a great control guy, that's I think what it takes.
Absolutely. No, I think
I
that
agree.
is some fantastic advice. Thank you for that, Davide. And then last question for you is who should reach out? How can our listeners help you at Bright IIoT? Are you looking for new customers? Are you looking to hire? Are you looking to have interesting conversations? How can our listeners help you?
Yes, you can. Of course, we can find me, LinkedIn. I'm pretty active, like between commenting and sharing, what we do. Our website is brightiiot.com. And then if you can, you want to meet me, I'm going to be like at the pack couple of weeks, and I'm going to be there. And then we just like reserve like a booth for the next year at Automate. So, and that
Very
one,
exciting.
that's what we did too. So yeah, I mean, LinkedIn, of course, it's the best place, to find me. Or my email address is David P. Of course, because we discussed it about my name. That's why I put
Yes.
David P. Because of the
Yeah.
pronunciation. At brightiiot.com, and yeah, that's where you can find me.
I love this. Thank you so much for joining us, Davide, and thank you to everyone for hanging out with us today. If you made it this far on YouTube or Twitch or LinkedIn or anywhere else, please go hit that follow button for myself, for Davide, for Vlad, for Manufacturing Hub. Follow Bright IoT on LinkedIn, and be sure to give a follow to Horner Automation, our sponsor for this month, that we again would like to thank them for that. And I will say that if you guys have made it this long on podcast format, please give us 5 stars. Please follow along. Every Thursday, we've got at least one episode coming out. So please make sure that you follow along. Again, I have learned that if I ask, you guys like, follow, and share along, and we continue to have more listeners every month. So as long as that happens, and until we're the #1 podcast in the world, I will continue to ask you guys to do that. Until next week, we'll see everyone soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.